I want to dig right in. As you heard, my name is Ben Muldrow. I'm with an urban planning firm that's based out of Greenville, South Carolina, called Arnett Muldrow and Associates. We've been doing this now for almost 20 years. It might be a little odd to think about an urban planning firm focusing in on community branding, but I always like to tell a little bit about the story of how that happened. I work with my oldest brother. So if you've ever worked with family before, you can know exactly how fun that is. This is the same brother that used to hold me down and spit on me when I was little. And it was right at 20 years ago now, he was doing a lot of planning and downtown revitalization work. And the first thing he'd do in any community is he'd go in and he'd review the past plans. And he started to get really frustrated because there were all these really expensive old plans with really great ideas that had gone unimplemented. So he was like, well, do I tell them, hey, I'm going to charge you to do the same thing they said do a decade ago? Or do I invent new ideas and assume you didn't like the old ideas? And the thing he finally realized was, he felt like these plans were going unimplemented because the citizens weren't falling in love with the vision. And if the citizens didn't fall in love with the vision, then it was simply too difficult for a plan to last over the turnover in elected leadership. So by engaging the citizens and really engaging marketing tools and tactics into the planning process, we started to see overall planning implementation increase. And obviously, when you're a planner and you make your entire living off of making plans that actually become reality, that's a good thing, right? So when we first started doing this, there was no such thing as community branding. That was a buzzword that somebody very smart created later so they could charge thousands of dollars for this kind of stuff. They can't really charge for a consultant in common sense, so they have to make up some name. But that's really what this is. It's about looking at the community, thinking about the personality of the community and using it to your own benefit. So over the past 20 years, I've had the privilege of, now my numbers were wrong in the bio because I don't ever update it. We're up to 600 communities in 40 states and 5 countries. And, if you create a niche small enough, you can be really good at it, So I always tell my kids, find something so tiny that you can be the world's expert at it. So what I want to do is I want to talk you through this process. I want to tell you a little bit about why we do this. Feel free to stop and ask questions at any time. We'll keep it nice and casual. There are big bowls of peanut M&Ms back there, and I will not fault any of you if you need to stop and get those. But it's always important to start with this question: why do we brand? Okay? Why is this a buzzword that has become popular? Why are communities now investing in it? And the best way to illustrate this is I've got 5 kids. So we're constantly celebrating a birthday, So in the 1940s, we would have gone to the local grocer. We would have bought flour and eggs and sugar. We would have spent about 50 cents and gone home and made a cake. Now, by the 1960s, we'd go to that same local grocer. We'd spend about $2 on a box mix. By the 80s, we're going to a chain grocery store. We're spending about $10 on one of those weird quarter sheet cakes with the plastic clown heads on them. Y'all know what I'm talking about, child of the 80s. And now we're in the middle of renting Fortnite trailers and, doing all this kind of stuff. And what we really have to see here is we see this evolution from a raw material economy into a product, then service, and now the heart and soul of the experience economy. Experiences actually matter. We could sit there and we could talk all day long. There are a couple things you're not going to hear me say today. First of all, I'm not going to talk about millennials like they're aliens. I'm not sure why we can't seem to figure out that millennials are actually motivated by things that everybody else is motivated by. In addition to that, I don't know if you know it, this is a really top secret. Generation Z has already started graduating from college and has full-time jobs. Yeah. So we might have a Generation Z right here, I'm not sure. Being able to realize that the experience that people have and the connection that they have to their community is a very cherished relationship. And you can say this in the South pretty confidently: behind someone's family and their God, their relationship with home is the thing they cherish most. So you have to understand that relationship, and you have to be able to help foster and be the steward of that relationship so that that loyalty will go and work for you. So the overall goal, this is my definition here, branding is the discovery and preservation of a community's personality. You don't get branded, okay? That's what makes a community different from a corporation. If you've ever worked in corporate America at all and know anything about corporate branding, the key to corporate branding is something called control. Now, if you've ever worked with communities, you understand that there is no such thing as control in a community. You know, you cannot set down a mandate and say, henceforward, everyone looks and sounds exactly alike. That's not the way communities work. So branding has to be focused on cooperation, not on control. And being able to have a process that is focused on the preservation of the qualities that people cherish, that is the key to getting that community buy-in, okay? So, again, the overall thing that we're shooting to do is create what's called brand equity. Again, I'm throwing some good buzzwords out at you today. Brand equity. Brand equity is the idea that your personality has value, okay? So my example that I always love to show is we've got this brand new Mercedes. How much does this car cost? Take a guess. 60, 65, 70, okay? Now, what do you think when you see this? What you can probably go ahead and tell, it's got leather seats. Can't see the seats, but you're assuming, right? Kind of smell Corinthian leather. You assume that it's got really nice amenities and everything, and you assume that it's worth $60,000 to $75,000. But when you find out that this car is actually a Kia, how much is it worth? Not right, 25. Wow, that's a big 75 to 25. So literally you are spending 50 grand extra to feel awesome at the red light when the person pulls up next to you. So what does that mean as it relates to our communities? Well, especially in our smaller communities, and I mean, we've got two of the communities that are kind of on the eastern side of the state. We've got one that's about as close to Florida as we can get in Georgia, right? You know, southeast corner. And you guys, you have to have people who are passionate about being a part of your community. You have to have people that maybe are willing to drive a little bit farther, stay open a little bit later, work a little bit harder, take a little bit more risk, put in a little bit more effort, so that you can realize the visions that your community wants for itself. So that idea of brand equity literally is about cultivating connection and then using the connection to create momentum. Does that make sense? That's not a hard idea, right? It's kind of like be nice to you so they'll be nice back, so we can all work together. Now, oh my goodness. Whew. So the thing that I've learned is if you want to be an expert, you have to have like a top 10 list. I'm not that good, so I only have a 5 list, okay? So these are my 5 rules of what not to do to screw up branding, okay? You're allowed to laugh. So rule number 1 is called the khaki rule. And this is something that most communities are very, very guilty of. You've got to avoid design by committee. If we were to all sit around this room and decide on one and only one outfit that we're going to wear for the rest of our lives, we're going to end up in khaki pants, right? You know, and it's like we probably are going to end up having some sort of like polo shirt, and we're going to end up looking like we work at Best Buy, you know? So consensus, yeah, you guys got button-up shirts. It's okay that we're all wearing the same outfit. It's fine. You know, the thing is that consensus does not break you into someone's mindset. Consensus does not shake things up. Consensus does not make a point. You know, it is a rare, rare day that you will see a person get irate about being handed a bowl of vanilla ice cream. It's vanilla, you know? But you're not seeing a ton of people that say, I don't care where I am, where I go. Every ice cream place I go in, I cannot wait to taste their vanilla. You know, it's just not really the way that it works. Some people are like that. I love vanilla, but it's one of those things where it's like you have to you gotta be willing to ruffle some feathers. You have to be okay with the idea for a community to get from point A to point B, that it means that 100% of your population is not necessarily gonna be comfortable with that move. Because if 100% was comfortable with that move, you would have already moved there, right? So you got to avoid that design by committee, and this is a great example. We were working in Kittitas County, Washington. This is if you kind of look at the state of Washington, essentially most people know of Washington as Seattle and the rest of the state, right? So everything that is the gray cloud of Seattle stops at Snoqualmie Pass, where Kittitas County starts, okay? So it's like if you travel east out of Seattle, the first time you get to see the sun is in Kittitas County. So we introduced this simple idea, live life in color, not groundbreaking, but the committee got a hold of it, right? And the first thing they said is, well, people don't know where we are. So maybe our logo should be a map of the state? Yeah, because we don't have Google, right? And then it gets better, because then if you've ever done marketing for a county before, you realize that strategy and diplomacy are not related to one another in any way, shape, or form. So if we're marketing the county, we got to make sure we name every single town that's in our county in our logo, right? And then it just continues to get worse and worse and worse with each iteration, until finally, thank God, someone on the committee said, this is absolutely horrible. This looks worse than my 5-year-old's art project, and they ended up landing on the original recommendation. But the thing is that when you get a group of people together and you have a strategic solution to a problem, and you ask them to analyze that solution, they feel empowered to critique it and change it, even if it's fine. We end up spending probably, I'm going to guess, 40% of our time arguing or stalling over the last 3% before we act. So adopt, move forward, and evolve as need be. You know, again, that's the other beautiful thing about community branding. You're not going through and changing every single sign of your franchise overnight in one day, you know? So you can evolve. That's the beautiful thing. It's organic. Whenever you go through a process, it's a very, very simple process. Now, I've got to be clear, because I say don't design by committee, but that doesn't mean don't listen to your community. You need to engage them, but you need to engage them in the right point of the process. And the right point is the beginning, not the end. You have to find out from them what the qualities and attributes that they love about the community are, and build those into any system that you have, so that your community does not see a branding effort as a dilution of the place they call home. Okay? So you engage them, and then you come back and present and inspire them. And then the byproduct of a process like that is an empowered populace. And when the citizens feel empowered, they actually get really excited. They like being a part of something. So, number 2, do not, for the love of God, do a design contest, okay? There's a reason why we have never seen the Georgia Department of Transportation do a bridge design contest before, you know? Because it's too important, right? Well, it's important. This is very important for us. This is a great example. This is a logo from a community in India. I challenge you to even figure out exactly what the community's name is from the logo. It actually is the smallest component of the entire logo. Let's see. They win points for thoroughness, right? They pretty much have hit on every single concept possible. They apparently specialize in Soviet-era rocket ships. You know, it's one of those things where this is that perfect example of trying to say too much. You know, a graphic identity's job is not to tell your community's story. It's too hard. Communities are too complex, okay? So you always need to remember, there's a simple phrase that I use, they should be springboards for storytelling. The best thing in the world that you can have is a toolkit that motivates your residents to talk about the place they call home. Because when you have that, you have meaningful conversations. And we're going to digress for just a second because we understand that we kind of have this economic development focus anytime we focus in on placemaking. And last week I spoke at the Virginia Economic Developers Association conference, and they started off the whole thing with this giant list of stats of all their successes. Big numbers. Look at all the jobs we created. Look at all the money we made. And the weird thing is, I don't know if y'all realize it or not, but in 2019, facts are different than they used to be. Like, you used to be able to lead with fact, and a fact was an inarguable point. Like, that's kind of the definition of a fact. Now, if you lead with data, you actually stimulate the skeptical mind. You trigger every single part of a person's mind to start asking whether they can trust you or not. But when you lead with emotion and you lead with storytelling and you create a connection first, you're now creating the platform for that data and those success stories to be received. That's another reason why this is so important in crafting that vision and communicating about the power of your community, because if you're not priming the receiver, they're not going to hear anything you got to say. Okay? Now, just to prove, if this didn't prove it, that design competitions are bad ideas, I have a couple more examples. We've got La Crosse, Kansas, the barbed wire capital of the world. This is exactly what happens when a community thinks that their task is to create a phrase that no one else can say, right? They think that uniqueness is the litmus test between good and bad. And I'm here to tell you today that uniqueness is not how you win branding. In fact, it's the opposite of what you're looking for. You want to create the pathway to connection, not the thing that makes you different from everybody else. And as this shows us clearly, there's a big difference between saying something no one else can say and saying something nobody else wants to say, right? Now, we got to stick in Kansas for a little bit because they're really creative out there. Let's see. Gas, Kansas. Don't pass gas, stop and enjoy it. So literally their community identity is a fart joke, right? And you saw the sneak peek. God, this is horrible. Hooker, Oklahoma. I wish that this was a joke. I really do. So it's actually called Hooker, Oklahoma. It's a location, not a vocation. And literally their local sports teams are called the Horny Toads, if I can get back there. And if you go there, you can go to the local senior center and you can literally buy once a hooker, always a hooker t-shirts, okay? And like literally, like when you sit there and you think about it and you're like, okay, it really can't get worse than prostitution as like a community branding theme. There's always Colorado. And Colorado, they have Severance, the town of Severance, where the geese fly and the bulls cry. I had absolutely no clue what in the world that meant. It was like one of the oddest statements I'd ever come across. And I assumed, because I'd been doing a good bit of work in Wyoming in that general part of the country, and I assumed that it was a reference to the beef slaughter industry. I knew there were a lot of ranches there, and I was like, maybe Severance is the place where everybody takes their bulls to, and it never caught on because it's like, well, they take more than just bulls there. What's unique about bulls? Oh wait, bulls have testicles. So literally, wow, that was a good collective groan all at once. Literally, this community's identity is wrapped around bull testicles. You know, Rocky Mountain oysters, a huge delicacy in that part of the country. But again, you know, Not really the best way to kind of lead with your best foot forward, shall we say. All right, rule 3, the seal rule, okay? Seals are not marketing tools. If you are working in your community and the only thing that you have at your disposal is your city or town or village seal, you need something else. I, once again, wish this was a joke. But this is the actual seal of Whitesboro, New York. They swear that this is a white colonist and a native engaging in a fun match of wrestling. It caused an uproar. The village came together and voted overwhelmingly to keep this seal without changing it in any way, shape, or form. Which again goes back to point 1, don't actually listen to people's opinion when you can't trust their opinion. But the funny thing about a seal is an important graphic tool in the overall system of communicating about your communities, but it's not a marketing tool. You kind of think about that history of things, you think about this, it goes back and it's tied into heraldry and it's tied into the symbology. A lot of times, a seal can actually serve as kind of like the design garbage disposal of all the bad things that come out of a branding process, right? Like, because there are people out there that are convinced just because your community was started on a railroad that your logo has to have a train in it. It doesn't. Like, it's okay to not have a train in your logo just because you have a railroad track, but they want to put everything in here. So this is an example from Salisbury, Maryland. Literally, there's tomatoes, pumpkin, haystack, cucumbers, apples, strawberries, beans, sailboat, pine tree, college building, tree-lined road, and building-lined street. And the best part of all this is that top right-hand corner of the crest. They call that a building-lined street. It's got 11-story buildings on it. They do not have that in Salisbury. But it is affectionately known throughout the community. some level of importance to anything in this country. We are the first state, though, out of technicality. So those are my rules. Does that make sense so far? Any questions? Rules kind of starting to make sense? Okay. I want to jump in and show you some examples, because it's fine to sit there and hear kind of what not to do's, but what does it look like? What does a good system look like? So the first example I want to share with you is from Opelousas, Louisiana. Now, sweet. So Opelousas is east of Lafayette. They are the third oldest community in Louisiana. They were very proud of being the third oldest. I don't know if you follow, do I have somebody here from Georgia Tourism? So obviously she's on top of tourism trends. She might not know this because it's like emerging trend, but people are going around America and they're visiting the third oldest community in every state. You know, it's like third oldest, what does that really mean? But once you start to dig into their story, they've got some really great elements. First of all, they're the home of Zydeco Music. They've got Tony Satchery's is headquartered there in their major production facility. So if you've ever had Cajun or Creole seasonings, you probably had Tony's. They're the home of Savoy's. Savoy's is the largest producer of jarred roux in America. Like I say, they're the birthplace of Zydeco. They're also the home of something called Prairie Country. And do not question the difference between a keyed accordion and a button accordion unless you want to get in a fight in Opelousas on a Friday night, because Prairie Country uses one and Zydeco uses the other, and do not cross those two. They're the home of a guy named Clifton Chenois who invented the rub board. Like, they've got these great, great stories. So, yeah. Oh, it is an amazing place. It really is. But they were all hung up on being the third oldest, right? So the first thing that we had to do was look at their name. And it is kind of a peculiar name. You know, it's not the kind of place that you see all the time. So we wanted to think about that and have that work in our favor. Typically, you have four options. The top's called title style, down style, small caps, or all caps. But you need to think about your name like a graphic. You want your name to be the connective tissue. That connective tissue between your organizations. Because guess what? Even in the world of what I call chamber diplomacy, where a chamber of commerce becomes a area chamber of commerce, and then a greater area chamber of commerce, and then the Northeast greater awesomeness chamber of commerce, trying to make relevance, they have that identity. Your Main Street organizations, your city governments, everybody's sharing the same identity, but for some reason, we don't look to our name as being the thing that becomes that connective tissue. So from there, we go through, we looked at all these different typefaces, and we landed on a script. We actually wanted it to be hard to read on purpose. That's an interesting kind of mindset. I think a lot of times people think that good design always means that it's purely legible when you drive past at 70 miles an hour. But if you have a thing that people don't understand, and people inherently want to understand things, when you design it in a way that it stops them and slows them, then that's working to your advantage. So what we landed on was something that looks like this. We introduced that very simple tagline, perfectly seasoned, ties in with Cajun Creole culture, ties in with the music background, ties in with the third oldest community in Louisiana, thank God. Then we created a graphic system that helped them to tell those stories, whether it's the fleur-de-lis for the seasoned culture, the seasoning shaker, seasoned flavors, or the keyed accordion and the fiddle for seasoned sounds. So now all of a sudden, the whole system starts to come together, and it's like, okay, this now becomes that springboard. We can tell our story. But guess what? So many times our stories are delivered by minimum wage employees at fast food restaurants and gas stations. So you always have to launch with community pride. You have to remind people why their place is special. Because if they're not going to deliver positivity on the ground, then all of your external efforts are wasted. You know, you've got to start and get your house in order at home first. Now, in addition to that, we always go through and we try to ask a lot of questions. We do a lot of focus groups, and a lot of times we'll ask the question, what color are you as a community? And I will be honest, it's kind of a silly question because most of the time the answers are pretty simplistic. I feel like we're blues and greens because we have sky and grass, and it's like, okay, all right. But in Opelousas, the answer was far more specific. It was always warm. We had this one where I asked the question and the lady was like, well, we're not quite paprika, but we're close. And I'm like, paprika? Well, what they were describing was the color of Tony's seasoning. So once we finally figured it out, we went to the local grocery store, we bought a canister of Tony's, poured it out on a little bathroom tray, and I took a picture of it, and that's what you're seeing now. And this photo became the background for their billboards, their ads, their brochures. Now, do we expect for outsiders to know that? Absolutely not. But does that become yet another story for them to tell? Absolutely. So, same thing with you can see here, just putting that logo on top of the rub board, just giving them little things that they can tell these stories from. And then one of my favorites from there was this guy. This guy, we talk a lot about public input, that I think planners always do. And we talk about Joe Citizen as like the generic person. Well, this guy's name is actually Joe Citizen. So he came up after the meeting. He was like, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Joe Citizen. It's like, well, it's nice to finally meet you because we've been talking about you for years. But the thing that Joe did was Joe created the connection between the community and the Zydeco music. Now, a lot of communities would have proudly declared they're the birthplace of Zydeco music, even if you can never hear that music in that place anytime.
There's one mural, a very bad mural on one side of the building, and that's it.
When were you there?
Oh, God, 2017, or 2016 in the fall.
Okay. Well, how many nights were you there?
I was in a very historic mansion. It was very wonderful. Probably 2 or 3.
Okay. They have live Zydeco music 6 nights a week. Now, you do have to know how to find it. And their tourism office is not open as much as it should be. And that's Melanie's fault, but that's okay. We'll talk about that later. But the thing that Joe did was Joe connected with that experience. And he gave people the opportunity to actually hear that music that people were talking about. And without it, and you can hear it in her voice. Like, I went and I didn't get to hear it, and now I feel let down. The community made a promise to me and then let me down. So you have to be really, really mindful about that relationship and about how you connect with that and deliver on that. How are we doing? Okay, we got good time. Okay, does anybody know Maitland, Florida? Maitland's north of Orlando. It's a probably 1920s community that never had a downtown. It literally was it was one of the first places in America that was developed purely as a collection of neighborhoods without ever having a historic downtown. So in 2017, they decided they wanted to build one, which in our field makes most people roll their eyes and say, oh, that's going to be a lifestyle center and it's going to feel really crappy in about 8 years. But they were determined to not have that be the case. They were determined to think about development patterns of how downtowns historically started. They were determined to acquire property and then make it available to people where literally business owners could develop a building on their own and live above it, just the way that they used to be. So they wanted to go through and they wanted to create something that could be their heart of their community. Now, this was the logo that they had. This is for the city. It's a little bit busy. They said, we don't want you to change the city logo. We don't want you to touch it. We said, okay, we'd rather not touch it. Let's just forget that it exists and let's look at what it is we're here to do. And what they wanted was to create a logo for downtown. They wanted to build excitement around this developing downtown. So we created this very simple logo system. Couple things you need to know. They've got this really, really awesome art center in the heart of the kind of historic residential district. It's all built in Mayan revival architecture. So it's also a community that used to be orange orchards before it was neighborhoods. So we wanted to create an icon that both connected with the Mayan calendar, which you've ever seen that, it's kind of a circular engraving, and also kind of felt like it could be of that kind of citrus foundation. Wanted to be simple, clean, we wanted to work in one color. What was really cool with Maitland, though, was how the brand made its way into the events. So when you adopt something that's simple, whether you're doing a Italian festival, St. Patty's Day, Independence Day, wine stroll, Alive After 5, Taste Downtown. Now, this is literally where people were like, oh my God, that's so cool. You can turn it into a wreath. And it's like, yeah, it's amazing how many things you can do when you have something that's round. You know, it's like, it's not really rocket science, but people love the idea of expandability, and they love the idea of something that's simple. They can look at it and they can see how this works. Farmers market, first night, you know, so you've got a lot of different things going on there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to jump ahead real quick. Sorry. I can't see any of my slides. Okay. So one of the other things that you might imagine is, oh, well, that makes a lot of sense, but that's for big communities. And branding's not. How many does Bainbridge have? 14. So you're not small. That's the same size as us. How about you guys?
We're about 36,000.
Okay. That's big to me. What about you?
We're under 4,000.
Under 4,000. Okay. So really good range here. Grayling, Michigan is 1,800 on a good day. Okay. They are in the middle of nowhere. They're 2.5 hours from the closest airport. They are the starting location of a 100-mile canoe marathon. And everything about that community revolves around this race. It's amazing how a one-week event can literally infiltrate the entire personality of a place. So in Grayling, their original logo was this. It was affectionately known as Daffy Duck in a canoe. And like once you see the duck, you can't unsee the duck. You know, it's like, is it a young lady or is it an old woman? Well, you see the duck and you're kind of stuck there. So, you know, that first evolution from a community standpoint was introducing this stylized G, the fish along the bottom. And if you don't know, a grayling is a fish, and it has a kind of interesting, kind of rounded off back fin thing. So, you know, that's that reference to the grayling fish. So you got this overall system for the community itself, but then we had to replace the Daffy Duck. So the city logo itself just looked like this, and now it doesn't look like a duck anymore. The downtown got a destination logo, Michigan's most colorful river town. Again, keeping it really clean, really simple. Their Main Street organization got an adaptation from an organizational standpoint that tied in, helped them to kind of tell their story of who they are and what they stand for. Collateral material. One of the things I always love to design is open signs. I don't ever design closed signs, only open signs. And if you've ever owned a downtown retail, you know that, and I did this so I can complain, and I can complain about them. Like, they complain about how nobody shops with them, but they close at 5 o'clock. And then when you say you should stay open later, they make this weird excuse about how they like their children and want to see them every now and then. And it's a difficult battle. So you have to kind of hit it from a couple different angles. But the combination of extended hours campaigns and designing nice open signs, we did this. And I I still don't know that I should repeat this or not, but y'all know Mast General Store, right? Have y'all heard of Mast? So Mast started in Valley Crucis, North Carolina. It grew very, very slowly for a very long time. And then probably maybe 12 years ago, 15 years ago, they decided to put a location in downtown Greenville. Now, this is a chain of stores that existed in the mountains. And in the mountains, it gets dark at 6 o'clock every night, no matter what. So they closed at 6. And then they went into this more urban downtown, but they decided to keep the same hours that everybody else had, even though families are walking up and down the streets until 10 o'clock at night. So what we did was we would go out at night, and we had this little bucket with muddy water and a sponge. And the sponge, we had an artist carve it so it looked like face and handprints. And people would take the sponge and just slap it on their windows. So when they would come in every morning, the windows were just completely and totally filthy with face prints of people looking in because the store was closed. Which then led to, in another community, we actually had the visitor center design Post-it notes that said, "Sorry you weren't there when I was ready to buy." I know. I mean, it's like, well, I mean, how do you get the message across? Are you in business, or is this like a weird hobby / like pain thing that you like? So, you know, you got to kind of feel it out for your community, but being able to tell those stories, being able to kind of use the connectivity to the community to shift and train those retail habits, I think is really important. Now, one of the other things is, we've talked a lot about destination, we've talked a lot about the organization, but where a brand really starts to grow wings in a community is when you start to integrate it into the events. So they did some really amazing events in Grayling, and going through and designing, using the color palettes, using the typefaces to create that connective tissue. People are weird. They don't connect the dots on their own. Like, they literally will sit there and say, "Our downtown is dead." And you say, "Well, there was a festival with 14,000 people there last weekend. I know the festival was really cool. Downtown is dead," you know? And so a couple of the things that they do, they close down their main street and set up a mini putt-putt golf course during the Masters. But instead of using putters, they have to use paddles. They close down part of their main street and they build an above ground pool, and they put a canoe in it, and they put 2 people facing each other, and they have to battle against one another, and whoever's stronger wins. And they literally do it during March Madness, so it's like a 64 tournament that they kind of walk through, which is kind of fun. You know, so just having all those events stitch in through the series, I think, goes a long way. Couple other favorites. I have so many examples in here. It's like 280 slides, and we could be here all day. Oh, this one's a fun one. So Hollister, California. How many of you have heard of Hollister before? The store, right? Okay. This community is the only community that I've ever worked in that has been sued by a major American company for making t-shirts with their own name on it. The community is literally not allowed to sell Hollister t-shirts because Abercrombie & Fitch owns the copyright on apparel for Hollister, California. Ridiculous, right? So we were already a little salty when we went in. The other thing that's kind of interesting is if you've ever been in a Hollister store, it looks like a typical California surf shop. Well, the actual Hollister, California could not be farther than that. They're all agrarian all the time. Their high school mascot is the hay baler. I'm serious. So we went through and we built a color palette that was based off of the things that they grew there. Color can be really subjective, but when you have a strategy behind the color, it kind of shuts people up a little. We introduced an overall graphic identity for them. Hollister, the original. Take a little jab at that. Downtown Hollister, the opposite of a mall. We talked about the hay balers, so we did a weekend excursion campaign. Hollister, the perfect place to bail. and we talked all about the wine and all that kind of stuff. But if you know anything about Abercrombie, you know that they are known for these black and white ads with like topless guys. So we decided to run the original Hollister model campaign. And we did everything from the vintners to the farmers, all the way to they're known to be the birthplace of the American biker. So you take those things that people know, and then you give them something to get them really excited. Beaufort, South Carolina. Beaufort's a great community stuck right between Charleston and Savannah. You go into the community, there were all kinds of logos with zero coordination to one another. We were there working with their Main Street organization. These were their events. So again, ton of events with no coordination. They do win definite points for having both a jogging shrimp and a sax playing crab. So, that's always good. But you got to think about not just the place, you got to think about the circumstances in the greater region. We don't just have Beaufort, but right up the road in North Carolina, we have same spelling, Beaufort. Now, Beaufort knows they say it wrong, right? I mean, everybody knows it's Beaufort, but they say it Beaufort. But then if you mispronounce your own name, you can't have a tagline be here. Like, you screwed it up. Like, joke's on you, right? Like, but the thing that is so sad is time and time again, you would hear these stories of people who thought they were going to one Beaufort and ended up in the other one. And I'm like, you missed that by like 4.5 hours. That really, really sucks. And I thought that this was like the worst, but I got hired to rebrand an airport because it was called Sussex County Airport and it was in Delaware, but too many people were trying to land in Sussex County, New Jersey, and literally landed in the wrong state, so they had to change the airport name. I know. So the thing that's cool about Beaufort, though, is it's a really, really old place. I think a lot of times people think that branding generates a tagline, whatever that phrase is. In Beaufort, they actually had 3 different tools. One was this phrase, Queen of the Sea Islands. This phrase has been around for over 100 years. People loved it. They had it tattooed. You don't change that stuff. But that's not telling their whole story. So what we did is we were like, that's your moniker. You keep that forever. It doesn't ever change. Then we came up with this position statement, established before Savannah, discovered before Charleston. So you have 2 nationally and really globally known destinations for history, and you're landing this community in a position of prominence right in between those. The other thing that we heard was we kept hearing this story about how as Sherman was coming through, everybody in Beaufort heard he was coming, so they buried their silver and ran. So literally, he marched into a completely abandoned town, and he decided to occupy it instead of burn it. So literally, the reason why Beaufort feels the way it does today is because they were chicken, right? So this whole idea of historic retreat was this thing of, hey, it's that dual meaning of telling the story while also being able to kind of talk about a value proposition today. They were formally established in 1711. We went through and we redesigned the events and brought them so that they were a little bit more in conjunction. I was sad to have the jogging shrimp go, so they did end up getting a jogging shrimp costume. So that's always good. He runs around. But then having a series of ads, love this one. By the time Savannah was founded, we were already old enough to drink. They filmed part of Forrest Gump there, and while Tom Hanks was on location, he fell in love with this local chocolate shop called the Chocolate Tree. So when they left Beaufort and went down to Savannah to film the box of chocolate scene, originally they just had a box of Whitman sampler. And Tom Hanks was like, no, I'm not using that. Go back to Beaufort and get a box. So literally in the movie, he's eating a box of chocolates from the Chocolate Tree, which is kind of cool. Couple more and then I'm done. These are the funniest. So if you've ever been to Virginia, we talked about pronunciations. Virginia pronounces things wrong on purpose to find out if you're a Yankee. Right? So to everybody else, this is Buena Vista. There it's Buena Vista. Oh, is it here? Well, come on, y'all use the same tactics. We all know. It's right down the road from Stanton, which looks like Staunton, and right up the road from Freeze, that looks like Fries, and over across from Buckhannon, which everybody else would say Buchanan. So, it's just kind of the way, it's that southern pronunciation. The thing that's interesting about Beaufort, though, is Beaufort is 8 miles east of Lexington. If you know anything about Lexington, if Lexington was a person, he's wearing a bow tie. Like, they're the home of Washington and Lee, the home of VMI. In a state known for redcoats, this is a mid-1800s industrial community. They were blue collar when they were created. And even their name, Buena Vista, it doesn't mean amazing views, it doesn't mean spectacular views, it means good views. It's like, seriously, like, it's kind of like their tagline could be, we're all right. Historically mediocre, right? And they literally, they never knew that difference was something that was valuable, something that was worth telling. And the thing that was interesting, though, was they had this sign, "Welcome to Buena Vista, 6,002 happy citizens and 3 old grouches." Now, what makes this sign really funny is it has been up since 1971. If you Google the word grouch, this photo comes up on the first page. Like, this is inherent in who they are. So we decided to take the idea of the 3 old grouches and turn them into the ambassadors. So we literally started telling the story of the community through the 3 old grouches. And this was something that they just really, they got it. They got it. It made complete and total sense. The idea was so good that some other communities have started stealing it. But the thing that really, one of the coolest things that happened after this was at the Christmas parade, they started picking 3 people each year to be the old grouches. Now, they're not the grand marshals. They're not the dignitaries. They mic them up and put them in front of the grandstand, and they literally criticize every float that comes by. And it is like the community absolutely adores it. So, all right. And then final one, and then I'm done. Travelers Rest. This is a great one. This is right up the road from where I grew up. Travelers Rest, literally the best you could ever say about Travelers Rest 15 years ago was that it was a gateway to the hub, to the heart of something. And they didn't even know what that something was. But they always were a base camp. They were the kind of place that you have to go through to see some really amazing outdoor amenities. And we wanted to position them as that base camp. So I came up with this whole idea of get in your element. And the other thing you have to know about Travelers Rest is nobody where I grew up called them Travelers Rest. They called them TR. We can go up to TR, right? And it's like, sorry, you guys don't have enough money to make them stop calling you TR, but maybe we can make TR into a good thing. So we launched this system. The logo was inspired by an element off the periodic table, and we simply launched it with an image campaign called It Starts with TR. Tradition, tranquil, travel, trails, trip. Now, I will say, as these go up, we did this almost 18 years ago. This was before Birmingham figured out they had in the middle of them. It was before Charlotte figured out they had a lot in them. Like, this is basic. This is simple. This is clean. And what was so amazing about this is as we were presenting it to the community, we had a guy in the audience, and he was a local Ford dealer, and he goes, "Trucks start with TR." And like, everybody laughed. But after the meeting, all these business owners were huddled up in these little groups talking about what their TR was going to be. So literally, because of the cleanliness, because of the simplicity, they had figured out a way to get the private sector to partner simply because they wanted to be a part. And that is where you hit true magic with community branding, by creating a system that allows the community to come together and tell its story. So I've gone over 4 minutes. I'd love do I have a second? Did I go 4 minutes or 20 minutes? I don't remember. It doesn't really matter. Okay, yeah. Does anybody have any questions?
you
Yeah.
really made me think. So Greensboro is Lake Oconee downtown, which I believe violates rule number.
Tell me what it is again.
Lake Oconee
Yep.
downtown.
Okay.
So our thinking has always been, and maybe this isn't right, I'd like for you to tell me that Lake Oconee is like the big thing where all the big dollars are being pumped into the marketing, and why wouldn't we hitch our cart to that? Because if we don't, some other town is going to, and we want to be the little downtown that's affiliated with the lake.
So don't be too harsh on yourself. So, and it's almost like you have to know the rule before you break the rule.
Okay.
A gateway is not a destination, right? A gateway is a pass-through. You're a downtown, okay? A downtown actually denotes things different from the heart, different from the hub, and different from the gateway. It implies an interaction. It implies a connection. When you go to the lake to get away, we're the place you connect to while you're away. It's a different relationship. So that doesn't mean that your message is wrong, but what it does mean is the connection needs to be economically motivated. Like you want to be the place that they go and spend money while they're on the lake. So it's all about that positioning of the relationship with the people that are there. And then the other thing that you have to make sure of, I don't know a ton about the area, but one of the biggest things you have to be concerned about, and when you have mountains, when you have lakes, when you have a heavy population of second homeowners, and you end up having a lot of people that are only partially connected to the place, you always have to be mindful to not give too much of your attention to the people that are only dedicating part of their attention. You know what I mean? So just be really mindful of how the strategy evolves and make sure that you're doing it in a way where you're still able to shape what it is you stand for. Instead of simply being the place that affluent people who have done well enough to afford a lake house go and have a glass of wine on Fridays, you're becoming the place where this is where you can feel at home even if you're not at home. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's not bad. It's not bad. One other thing, and then we'll wrap up. Everything that you saw, every example that you saw today was completed on site in the community in 3 days. Okay? These do not have to be 12-month-long, painful processes. It's about getting in, getting the people at the table, and to be completely honest, the longer you draw it out, the more painful it will be. Because you're never going to hit 100%. It's just not going to happen. And it's better to start using and evolve as you go. Okay? So we actually do all of our design in a process that's shaped off of a urban design charrette. We literally create everything on site, input meetings all on the first day, public presentation on the third day. Because if we can have people on that third night say, I'm not really sure about the shade of that green, you know you've done a good job, you know? And what's nice about it is if you do it like that, you do it in a way that feels very transparent, it helps to aid in the organizations working together. People are going to be convinced that somebody is going to get your attention back behind closed doors and you're going to end up angling a system that benefits one organization over the other. And it is so hard to convince everybody that, guess what? The chamber is not actually your enemy, or the CVB is not actually your enemy. You're all in this together, cultivating different messages for different targets about the same place. So I think that's all I know today. Thank you guys so much. And I'm not in a big rush because my flight's not till later. So if you guys have any questions, I want to sit and listen in on the next thing for a little bit. But if y'all have any questions, feel free to come grab me. So
Thank you.
thank you.